gluten intolerant? You may just be intolerant of Monsanto weed killer by Jason Luke. Scientists suggest that Monsanto's Roundup herbicide is what is making people have such a nasty reaction to gluten. Gluten has been a major news item for the last few years, not just for sufferers of acute gluten intolerance and celiac disease, but for increasing numbers of people who are seeking to eliminate gluten from their diet for general health issues, weight control, skin health, and even mood. As cholesterol and carbs once were, gluten is the new enemy, to the point that some have claimed it's a substance that the body isn't equipped to handle. I've even heard people blame gluten for all of the ails of modern civilization. After all, the cultivation of wheat, some say, is the birth of agriculture, and the ownership of crops goes hand in hand with the ownership of people that characterizes patriarchal, hierarchical civilization. Though wheat is a very modern crop, but all over-the-top speculation aside, a new scientific review has suggested a far more specific problem with gluten, and it has nothing to do with wheat itself. Rather, the peer-reviewed article Glyphosate, Pathways to Modern Diseases Celiac's Prue, and Gluten Intolerance suggests that the real criminal isn't gluten but glyphosate, aka Roundup, the Monsanto-manufactured weed killer. Used around the world, glyphosate is sprayed on crops genetically engineered to be Roundup ready, meaning that the crops resist the poison, while any nearby weeds are immediately killed. But that potentially leaves the end product consumer with two toxic vectors to deal with, not only the Roundup that was sprayed on the crops, but, in some cases, the prior genetic engineering done to the crops themselves. The review abstract lists the following allegations. 5% of the population in North America and Europe suffer from celiac disease and gluten intolerance, leading to nausea, diarrhea, rashes, macrocytic anemia, swollen red blood cells combined with lack of red blood cells overall, and depression. Gluten can also lead to increased risk for thyroid disease, kidney failure, cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, infertility, birth defects, and miscarriages. Glyphosate is the key culprit for all of this. Fish exposed to glyphosate get symptoms similar to celiac disease. Glyphosate impairs the enzymes that detox environmental toxins, chelates key minerals, meaning you don't absorb them, and depletes key amino acids. Glyphosate is often used to artificially ripen crops, which the study blames for kidney failures in Central American sugarcane workers. I have sugarcane farmer relatives who have died of kidney failure in Fiji, where Roundup is widely used. Bad news for Monsanto, especially after the recent kerfuffle over the prior, extremely controversial Seralini study on glyphosate. Because very little negative research has been done into glyphosate, since, as activists allege, Monsanto funds nearly all the studies into glyphosate, it's been slow going in building a case against Roundup. But this information, which looks much more sound, and the Seralini study, may prove yet another arrow in Monsanto's side. Now wait, there is more. Roundup weed killer found in 75% of air and rain samples. Goff study finds dash. So you cannot get away from it. The GM farming system has made exposure to Roundup herbicide a daily fact of our existence, and according to the latest U.S. Geological Survey study, it's probably in the air you are breathing. A new study from the U.S. Geological Survey, accepted for publication online ahead of print, in the journal Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry, titled Pesticides in Mississippi Air and Rain, a Comparison between 1995 and 2007, reveals that Roundup herbicide, aka glyphosate, and its still toxic degradation byproduct AMPA, were found in over 75% of the air and rain samples tested from Mississippi. In 2007, the researchers evaluated a wide range of pesticides currently being used, through weekly composite air and rain sampling, collected during the 1995 and 2007 growing seasons, in the Mississippi Delta agricultural region. The researchers discovered the following. 37 compounds were detected in the air or rain samples in 2007. 20 of these were present in both air and rain. Glyphosate was the predominant new herbicide detected in both air, 86%, and rain, 77%, in 2007, but were not measured in 1995. Total herbicide flux in 2007 was slightly greater than in 1995, and was dominated by glyphosate, According to the report, 2 million kilograms of glyphosate were applied statewide in 2007, or 55% of the total herbicide flux for that year, about 129 grams per square meter, leading them to state the high prevalence of glyphosate in air and water was not surprising. Even though glyphosate was only tested in 2007 based on the 1995 figures on glyphosate use, 147,000 kilograms statewide, the researchers estimated that glyphosate added 3% of the total herbicide flux for 1995, or approximately 7 micrograms per centimeter, 7 grams per square meter, per sample. This estimate, if correct, reveals that there has been an approximate 18-fold increase in glyphosate concentrations in air and water samples in only 12 years, 1995 to 2007. The researchers pointed out that the 2007 weekly air concentration pattern for glyphosate was similar to those of other commonly detected herbicides in both 1995 and 2007, in that the highest concentrations occurred in April and May. However, there were detectable concentrations of glyphosate over the entire growing season, which is consistent with how glyphosate is used on GM crops, including for post-emergent weed control, throughout the growing season. The longer period of exposure adds to growing concern that this ubiquitous toxicant represents an unavoidable body burden, and that even small daily environmental exposures may be causing significant harm through their cumulative and synergistic effects with other toxicants. So, what is the toxicological significance of the discovery of glyphosate in most air samples tested? In the month of August 2007, if you were breathing in the sampled air, you would be inhaling approximately 2.5 nanograms of glyphosate per cubic meter of air. It has been estimated the average adult inhales approximately 388 cubic feet, or 11 cubic meters of air per day, which would equal to 27.5 nanograms, billionths of a gram, of glyphosate a day. Of course, when one considers the presence of dozens of other agrochemicals found alongside glyphosate in these samples, the interactions between them are incalculably complex, and produce far more harm together than glyphosate alone, i.e. synergistic toxicity. Also, now that recent cell research has shown that glyphosate may act as an endocrine disruptor exhibiting estrogenic-like carcinogenicity within the part per trillion range, there is all the more reason to raise the red flag of the precautionary principle, especially since inhaled toxicants evade the elaborate detoxification mechanisms of ingested toxicants, which must pass through the microbiome, intestinal lining, and liver, before entering the blood, and only a long time later the lung, far downstream. This study brings to the surface the extent to which GM farming has altered our daily exposure to chemicals, such that even the rain and air we now breathe contains physiologically relevant levels of glyphosate, fallout from the war against any plant not part of the monocultured, genetically engineered system of production. With a significant body of research now available today showing that glyphosate and its components are far more toxic than believed at the time of its widespread approval, the implications of ubiquitous glyphosate exposure should be carefully considered. Ultimately, findings like these reveal just how illusory is the perception of choice and health freedom when it comes to the GM, or non-GMO debate, and the consumer's right to avoid harm from GMOs by refusing to buy or consume them. Not only are consumers in the U.S. not allowed to know what is in their food with accurate and truthful labeling of ingredients, we now know that biopollution from GMOs produces uncontrollable and irreversible changes in the genomes of affected organisms when their transgenes escape into them, and we know that even beyond their genomic/proteomic differences, the contamination of GM foods with herbicides, like Roundup, glyphosate, makes them non-substantially equivalent in chemical composition to their non-contaminated alternatives. The reality is that the environment is becoming so saturated with the fallout from the ever-expanding GM agricultural/agrochemical farming grid that even if you somehow find a way to avoid eating contaminated food, you will be forced to have to deal with its adverse health effects, as long as you need air to breathe and water to drink. Ultimately, unless our food production system moves through its present chemical war-modeled phase of GM monoculturing, even non-GM food will end up being contaminated with these chemicals and transgenes, because nothing natural lives in a vacuum, and if it does, then it really shouldn't be called organic, and maybe shouldn't even be called food. And I recall reading in the 1980s an eminent epidemiologist, who said that when doctors blame lifestyle factors for a disease, it's a cop-out. They simply don't know the cause of the illness, but can't admit it. He said that the type 2 diabetes epidemic spread more like a contagion, which dogmatic doctors would not countenance, such as their training. Finally, this latest report suggests that Roundup may also be a factor in the type 2 diabetes and obesity epidemic sweeping the Western world. Links below.